Hello there, this is James at My PE Exam. Thanks so much for joining me. Let's see if we can sort of illuminate for you this idea of distance time graphs. And really, these are very practical things that we're going to address here. So they're very practical sort of skills, but underneath them, we need to sort of have some underpinning knowledge, which helps us to understand these notions of distance time graphs in general. So before we get on to drawing these things, let's have a look at that knowledge. And the first thing I want you to really kind of intuitively understand is the concept of velocity. Okay, now I'm sure you can tell me broadly what speed is, broadly what velocity is, but before we look at these distance time graphs, we're going to be able to illustrate velocity in a moment. So let's understand what it actually is. Velocity, first of all, is a vector quantity. That's because it has a direction. So it takes into account the notion of displacement, which you will recall is also a vector quantity. So in this case, we have displacement over time. So that is our equation for velocity. So of course, remember, displacement is measured in meters. Time, as you will know, is measured, in this case at least, in seconds. And therefore, not surprisingly at all, our units for velocity are meters per second. And generally speaking, I mean, you don't need to use colours when you do this, but we always put this little negative one. Don't panic too much why that's there, but it's meters per second. So that's a really useful thing for us to understand. So let's see if we can give a very basic example of that. If we were to say that, for example, a sprinter was to cover 100 meters in a 100-meter race, and they were to do that in sort of that elite men's time or almost elite women's time of 10 seconds, then of course the velocity, or what we'd say is the average velocity of that performance, would come out at 10 meters per second to the 1. Okay, 10 meters per second, because we can use this equation. Now, acceleration is the other format, the other vector quantity that's really useful for you to understand, to know before we get into these distance time graphs. And I'm going to show you a couple of different formats of this.